Greetings, I am Tom Earl. On this week's episode, we talk The More You Love Yourself with Timothy Mays. Check it out. Woo! Greetings, I am Tom Earl, and this is my year of adventure. We know you could be anywhere, so the fact that you are here today sharing your greatest gifts, your time and energy means the world to me. I hope you know that in this moment you are valued, you are appreciated, and you are loved just as you are. As you can see, I am not alone. I have an amazing guest. He goes by the name of Timothy Mays. What's going on, Timothy?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Hey, I am feeling blessed and I'm grateful that we finally got you on the show. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
It's an honor. Do you mind if I introduce you to the folks out there via your bio?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Timothy Mays is an educator, artist, and published author. He received his master's in higher education from Loyola University Chicago in 2016 and continues to dig deeper into his research around exoticism, disposability, and the healing of Black bodies. As an artist and spoken word poet, Timothy has competed in the National Poetry Slam, Ink Slam, College and University Poetry Slam Invitationals, and countless other events. He is now conducting spoken word and critical pedagogy workshops that give students and community members a space to develop their voice and materialize their thoughts. Timothy recently released his first poetry and affirmation book entitled "And Still I Rise to Fantasize," which attempts to channel Black resilience in the face of consistent trauma while having the unwavering courage to strive toward being holistically well. Timothy has devoted himself to making sure that people from low-income communities are prepared for and comfortable with the possibility of advocating for themselves to ensure that a true sense of community is accomplished. Very, very powerful work that you're doing, Timothy.
I appreciate you.
Yes. So we always start the episode off with a prompt.
Okay.
Bios are great.
Yeah.
And they're pre-written, and it's like the part of it that I can research about you.
Right.
But we want to know this. We want to know if you really knew me, like a friend, or a family member who's always maybe even razzing you a little bit.
Yeah.
If you really knew me, you'd know that.
Yeah. If you really knew me, you know that as much as my bio sounds really like heavy in terms of the work that's being done, that who I am as a person and just the way that I like to build community is very light and very joyful and really kind of built around the space of really just loving and enjoying the company that I keep with folks. I think a lot of times folks, they see the work that I do and hear my bio and the things that I'm committed to, and they automatically assume that that is coming from a space of negativity or some form of hate or whatever the case may be. But really it's rooted out of love, right? Love for people and love for folks who really want to have a genuine sense of community and a genuine sense of knowing and appreciating themselves and those who they are, closely connected to, and understanding that it's a part of a larger scope of understanding how we as a world and as a whole can create a true and greater sense of community as well. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah, ssure.
Let's take people back a little, like comic book, origin story.
Okay.
Did you know, the third grade, fourth grade, eighth grade, did you know I want to be a poet, community activist? I want to study pedagogy. Did you know all those things?
I don't know if I knew for sure, right? But I think there were some early signs of it. And I think I just needed to have those things nurtured, and to be poured into and watered and, for lack of a better metaphor. I remember when I was in the second grade, I started writing poetry in the second grade, and I wrote a poem actually for a young lady who I was very interested in the second grade, right? And so that was kind of the start of my my poetry experience, but it kind of built out and kind of metastasized as time went on, particularly because of the different experiences that I was having as a young person, right? Like going through my high school experience and my high school journey. Folks don't know the story, so I'll tell it a little bit here. But I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in a particular neighborhood and town that I grew up in, my mom was on drugs and my father was a drug dealer. And so I was actually born with crack cocaine in my system, and I was taken from my mother at birth. And I was in special education for a certain period of time. Doctors believed that my brain wouldn't actually fully develop, and that I was going to have some struggles in terms of education and, being able to function and things like that. And so as I kind of navigated and went through high school, I had a very difficult time, particularly because of the social or the environmental things that were going on within my house, right? My mom was, free from her drug addiction, but still battling with, her own personal things as well, her personal traumas and things that she needed to heal from. And so she was dating someone at the particular time that our family knew wasn't necessarily good for her. And as kind of an act of rebellion, I didn't take my schoolwork too seriously. And I was also, prior to being a poet, I played baseball for 18 years. And so my family is very well known for playing baseball in the city where we grew up. And so I started to move away from this idea and identity of being a baseball player and really wanted to find my own way in my own lane. And my senior year of high school, I wrote a poem that basically kind of, I want to say, was like a personification piece about music and how music is kind of like interwoven into every culture, no matter what the culture is. And from that performance, teachers who never really looked at me as someone who was capable of, really being able to intellectually engage, looked at me very differently after I did that poem. And I also realized for the first time after I performed, that was the first time that I had a full 3 minutes for people to listen to me say what I needed to say without interruption. And I realized and understood that if I could get my high school to sit down for a whole 3 minutes and listen to me, how powerful would it be if my parents could do the same? And so my mother and my father got an opportunity and a chance to hear me perform and speak. And that created a lot of conversation for our family. So poetry is kind of taken this place of and created this space of healing and conversation in our family in a way that I don't think any of us imagined that it would.
I appreciate you, having the courage of sharing that with us.
Oh, yeah.
It means a lot.
Yeah.
What do you think it was about poetry that called you? Because I know we've interviewed a lot of people who do poetry with young people.
Yeah.
And they're always saying, it's hard for us to get young men involved in poetry. So what do you think it was about for you that called you?
Yeah. I think it was, of course, having the space, right? Having the space to share my voice and to let out the things that I had going on inside, and have folks be able to relate and connect to that. As I kind of been mentioning, right? I'm really built and focused on building community, which is a huge part of who I am and just my identity as a whole. And so when I realized that by sharing my story, that other people would connect to it and in some way, shape, or form, get something from it, whether they identify with a similar story or they just felt something or felt like they knew or they found out something about me that they didn't know before that, that there was a true gift in that, right? And being able to do that. And I think about, in particular, the fact that, some of the traumas and experiences that I've had, as my life has progressed, the more that I've been vocal about them, the more free I've become from those things, right? Being able to suppress them and keep them down created more traumatic experiences for me. But the more that I'm able to vocalize them, the more I allow myself to be free. And, subsequently, a lot of other folks are starting to create some conversation and become free from things that they're experiencing as well. So that's where I really see the power and recognize the power of what poetry can do, whether it's spoken or written, just having the ability to create conversation for those who may not feel like they have a voice at all.
I love that.
Yeah.
So poetry was one of the first main tools to express and to heal. What would you say were some of the other building blocks? Or so around 18, you transitioned from baseball player identity to I'm a poet.
Yeah.
What would you say happened were some other things that started to add to your identity and your healing and where you are now?
Yeah, sure. I think being around like-minded folks who were having similar experiences. I think also I at that point in time, I did get things together academically, and I was able to take some courses at the collegiate level. And for the first time, I was exposed to classes and courses that spoke about African history. And for the first time, I really saw myself in education. Opposed to, or not opposed to, but in addition to the traditional kind of folks that we're introduced to in public education, right? During Black History Month, a lot of times we're introduced to, or we talk about Martin Luther King and, W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, right? The folks who have, kind of been celebrated quite a bit in American history, but I didn't really learn about the Moors and folks who created, who had 250,000 manuscripts in libraries and first universities in Timbuktu until I got to into my undergraduate studies, right, and learning about ancient Kemet and master teachers and folks who came to Egypt to learn from these folks. And when I learned those things, it totally awakened something inside of me that allowed me to understand that education is for me. It is something that I could see myself fully being invested in, and it's something that I'm, totally worthy and capable of achieving and diving deeper into. And it wasn't until I actually was able to see myself in it that I truly felt invested in and tried different things. So that was a big piece for me as well.
What was your major?
I was a sociology major in undergrad. So I was a sociology major with a minor in Africana studies. And then I dabbled in business law so like in a whole nother corner and arena. But I dabbled in business law as well. But sociology with a minor in Africana studies, and then got my master's in education as well. So.
And were you in a fraternity?
Yeah, I don't know if you can see the flag.
I can.
Yeah. So I did. I became a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and that was big for me too, right? And I, depending on your positionality, some people are for it, and some folks are against it. But for me, it was big and it was huge because, again, was someone who had a lot of different traumatic experiences growing up. I didn't have a lot of men who I trusted, right? And so this process of becoming a member of Alpha was huge for me because I had to rely on and trust all of these men who I just met. And so it gave me a truer sense of understanding, male relationship in a very intimate way. And I had to get outside of my comfort zone of feeling and believing, that other men would, attempt to hurt me or harm me in any way. And so that was huge. It was really, really huge for me. But even more so than that, I think one of the things that was really big about it was this thought process of if I needed to find 100 like-minded men 100 like-minded Black men or folks who I could just quickly identify with in the sense of the experiences that I was having at that particular time as a first-generation college student. Who can I contact? You know, who can I build with? And so for me, in that sense, that really became I want to say a revolutionary process for me, but it really opened my eyes to the possibility of seeing Black men in the way in which I had seen them, and now giving me this new narrative of what can be done collectively.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What for you was, one thing that I'm hearing is a lot of the ability to give name to what you went through as a young
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And I think so much of what people carry that stuff is because they can't name it. They're not able to identify, well, I was acting like this or that because of this.
Yeah.
Where did those tools start to enter into your life where you're able to look back and that's why this, that's why that? When did you start to experience that?
Yeah, I think those things really started to come into play once I started working in higher education. So when I was I want to say a junior in undergrad, I became an RA at Cal State Dominguez Hills, where I went for undergrad. And at that particular time, this was like at the start of folks really having conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And at that point in time, restorative justice and affinity circles and things of that nature were really starting to come about in the educational space, at least. And from those spaces and from those opportunities, I really started to reflect and hear other people's story. And once I began to hear other people's story and their experiences, it gave me the confidence to feel like I could share my own. And I think too, more so than anything, I say this all the time, but I think one of my greatest gifts from God has been my ability to observe and to pay attention to what's happening and what's taking place. And so when I thought about the, generational context in my family, all of the folks who had struggled and had a lot of issues in my family were folks who I found out in my adult years had a lot of issues that they suppressed, right? And that they kept to themselves. And having these regular conversations about what's going on in our life and in our family wasn't normal for us. And so in addition to that, my undergraduate experience in having various roommates and meeting folks who had a different upbringing than me kind of exposed me to different ways of operating and conducting, right? Going to a friend of mine's house and seeing his family, his mother, his father, both in the home, and seeing how they communicated gave me a different perspective about how I could go about doing things. And from that, I started to take pieces from all the different people that I was meeting about the ways in which I saw them conduct themselves and how they communicated with each other. And then I attempted to apply those same things to my life. And so I think that's what's kind of helped me get to this point where I'm able to give name and give voice to it because I understand that it's bigger than me, right? And again, and the more I say something out loud and the more that I verbalize it, the more I become free from it, but also give or allow, or hopefully someone else will feel empowered enough to, share their truth and tell their story as well.
What would you share with somebody who's listening, who's a man,
Mm-hmm.
and might be thinking, Tom, here you go again, talking about feelings.
Yeah.
Like men aren't supposed to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I think I was in that space too, right? And feeling like, well, men don't necessarily talk about feelings and emotion. And, society kind of coaches us and socializes us to speak in a certain kind of way and do certain things and respond a certain kind of way. And I would say, for anybody who would consider themselves to be free, or anybody who would consider themselves to be seeking some form of freedom, I would say having the ability and the autonomy to decide what you want to do with your feelings and emotions is a huge part of what it means to truly be free. Because again, you have all these outside pressures telling you what you can and cannot do, and you're not accessing a full part of who you are. And I think for me, once I got to the point where I realized that a lot of the toxicity and the things that I was experiencing that were negatives were in direct correlation to the fact that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of sharing my emotions, right? If I was dating a young lady and I didn't necessarily like the way that she made me feel, to respond in a negative way or lash out was commonplace. But it would have been a lot more effective. And I learned that it was a lot more effective when I explained and said, hey, that really affected me. That really impacted me when you did X, Y, and Z, right? And the response to it was a lot different because we were able to build off of me recognizing where I was wronged and vice versa. Whereas if I hadn't vocalized that or shared my feelings, I probably wouldn't have gotten to a space where things would have ever been resolved. And it would have created cycles of me constantly having these repetitive issues with folks. And so that was a long version, but but what I would say is there are no limitations on what it means to be a man and what manhood is. You truly can define that for yourself. And I think we truly find the purest essence of who we are as men when we, dive into that part of who we are. And I don't think that, God, the creator, has put that inside of us for us to deny it and not experience the fullness of it. And I think the more that you experience it, the more you become in tune with everybody who is around you, because it's a very human experience.
I love that.
Yeah.
Let
me say this. I'm sorry. Let me just say this real quick. You asked me earlier, what is it about, what is it that I would want folks to know that's outside of my bio? So one of the things that I've tried to be very intentional about saying, even in helping folks understand, because I think this really explains like where my feelings and my desire to express my emotions comes from. But also how my experience growing up was very conflicting to that. So I've been telling folks, if you really want to understand who I am and where my thought process comes from, and where my heart is really aligned to, when I was 6 years old, we moved to Stockton, California to live with my uncle. And we didn't have cable. We didn't have any type of cable services or anything like that. And so every day, myself and my two older siblings, we watched 2 movies back to back every day. And those 2 movies were Menace to Society and The 5 Heartbeats. So when you think about like who I am and my upbringing, right, we have this very like inner city, low income, poor neighborhood experience of like violence and the struggles and trials and tribulations. But then on the reverse side, you have this movie that's very like joyful in the sense of celebrating music and love and connection. And so I like to explain that and bring that up because that's kind of the duality of my experience and my feelings and where the basis of who I am kind of came from and what I drew from as a young person, I guess. So, yeah.
I love that. It brings up a point that I was going to ask. I've had young people share with me or people DM me after an episode and say something to that effect that like where you had the duality. So Tom, my life is the more menace to society.
Yeah.
You can't expect me to be out here talking about my emotions, being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
What are the conversations you have? Because I'm sure you've talked with young people about a very similar conversation. What do you share with them when a conversation or a question like that comes up?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of folks feel that way, right? This whole need of like, yeah, my life is very menace to society. And so I have to protect myself and in the environment in order for me to be able to survive. I have to, operate in a particular kind of way. And I totally understand. And I totally get that perspective and that feeling. But I think, if possible, if there are times and there are spaces where you are allowing yourself or you are capable of, taking down that guard and being able to experience the fullness of your emotion, then you should, right? For me, I had the similar experience of the, menace to society experience growing up. But at the same time, I also had my out from the neighborhood that I was in was there was a local church that used to come by, and they would have these youth nights and allow us to kind of come and, fellowship with other young people. And that kind of gave me a different perspective because I felt like I was in a safe space, and it gave me the chance to kind of engage and talk to other folks and hear what their experiences are. And I think when you start to think about the duality of it all, some people may or may not agree, but I've always said I think I had to operate in a space of there's a time to be a lion and then there's a time to be a lamb. And I think that is in reference to there's times and spaces where you have to protect yourself, but there's also times and spaces where it's okay for you to be nurturing and to be accepting of love and comfort and care, because it's necessary to have that balance if you're going to function in different spaces and capacities. My wife challenges me on that a lot, right? This idea of you don't have to be so guarded and protected with me, because I'm hoping that we're facilitating and creating a space where you could truly be comfortable. And I think once you allow yourself to be vulnerable and allow folks to see you in a particular kind of way, you will start to kind of draw in on that same type of energy, and it'll kind of create an environment for you that is supportive of that. So
I think that's great for anybody who's working with young people.
yeah.
I think that's great advice, that if you have to be like that in the world, find at least one space where you can let your guard down.
Yeah.
You can be you
Yeah.
and work on those emotions. I love that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say just quickly, I saw it every day, right, in my classroom. And there was a lot of times where young men were struggling, young women as well, struggling to really figure out what it is that they wanted to do and who they wanted to be in the presence of their peers, right? And trying to figure out, do I want to be this super tough person, or do I want to, be somebody who is open to expressing their emotions, and trying to figure that whole piece out. And I think, once they really realize, like, as long as I'm being true to myself and true to my experience, you're getting the authentic version of who I am. And that's what's most important, more so than, you having a particular perception or reputation of who I am. When my truth comes through, you'll truly understand who I am and operate accordingly. So.
When you were sharing at the beginning, and it kind of ties into this, where if you really knew me, you'd know that the bio, all that's coming from a place of love and kindness and heart. One thought that came to mind for me, and it kind of ties into this, is, do you ever feel that you need to start there because of people's perceptions of Black men is the opposite? That like, oh, you're angry and you're hard and all of these kind of things. Do you think that also ties into young Black men or young Black boys struggling with, or if society's telling me I should be this or perceiving me as this, that it makes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I get what you're saying totally, 100%. Yeah, I have a poem called The Zoo, and one of the parts of the poem, it really talks about that, right? And this feeling and sense of like, as a Black man, right, it doesn't matter if I have on a suit and tie, or, if I speak in a certain way or a certain manner. there is going to be some form, the feeling that there's going to be some form of judgment or, reaction to who I am. And so I think for me, one of the things that I attempt to do and why I share those things about love and community and care early on is because I think oftentimes that's something that's not associated with Black men. But I think in addition to that, when folks hear the term pro-Black, I think people oftentimes think that means anti-white. And those things aren't necessarily dichotomous, right? It's not that or this. Like those things can be standalone. Like pro-Blackness can be standalone. And it doesn't have to be an existence or an attachment with whiteness in any way. And so I think it's important for people to know like this self-love and this care for self is in radical opposition to anything that anybody would, think otherwise or feel that I shouldn't feel that way. And it's not from a place of feeling like, I'm superior to anyone. But it's saying that if we stand side by side or we stand next to each other and we radically love ourselves the way that we're supposed to radically love ourselves, we'll be able to radically love each other. But until we get to that space of understanding how we can radically love each other, we won't be able to fully appreciate anybody else, right? And so I think that's one of the greatest things that I've learned, even just through my journey is the more that I love and I appreciate myself, the more I have the capacity to love and appreciate somebody else's uniqueness, right? And what they bring to the world. So.
I mean, well said.
Yeah.
Underneath a lot of that, or at the heart, at the core, sounds like a grounding in spirituality for you. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to talk about your relationship? How has your relationship with God changed over the years? What does God mean to you? Religion? Any reflections you want to share on that?
Yeah. I think that's been an interesting journey. And I'm glad you asked me that question because I actually had a student in my office before we started this interview. And she was explaining to me like, I think I'm really struggling because I grew up very Christian and I'm learning in my courses that, there's some things that are kind of conflicting with my Christian identity. And I think I went through the same point in my life. I grew up Christian and, went to church quite a bit growing up. And as I kind of developed and kind of got to know myself a bit more, I started to kind of move away from, I want to say organized Christian beliefs and faith and the thought process of like, oh, if I go to church every Sunday or if I read my Bible every day, then I'm a quality Christian. And more so moving into the space of really having authentic relationship and understanding what it is that I know that God has created me to do. And, one of the things that I think I've kind of held on to from growing up Christian, I've always strongly identified with the idea of someone sacrificing themselves for others, and also sacrificing themselves for what they believe in. And I think that's one of the things that I had to thoroughly explain to my wife before we got married is, my feelings about community and about Blackness and love for self are very connected to my purpose and why I believe God put me here. And I don't think those two things are separate. I think the more that you love yourself and the more that you continue to build and invest in yourself, and the more you continue to build and invest in others and in community, the more you start to reflect and truly exemplify what God has called you to do and called you to be. And so I've kind of moved into that space more so than, operating on a daily space of, reading my Bible or adhering to set boundaries about what it is that I should do. So
Another thing that I keep hearing come up, and this is something I'm going through as well. I'd love to hear your reflections. How has marriage evolved you as a person, or, improved what's that journey been like for you?
Man, man. Yeah, it's funny because um when I wasn't married, I spoke in very singular terms. It was like everything was about me. And then like now that I'm married, everything is like, yeah, my wife introduced me to da da da. And if I'm being honest and transparent, that's the thing that I wanted more than anything. Was to be married, and to have a relationship with someone who truly allowed me and encouraged me being me, and understood that everything that I am and everything that I'm doing is connected to what God put me here for. And so marriage has been super, super, super dope. And again, um, yeah, for me, it's something that I've always kind of looked forward to, and hoped that I would have someday. But I also knew and understood that I wasn't necessarily ready for it. I didn't know. I knew I didn't have all the necessary pieces to get into a space to where I would actually be ready for marriage. And what I mean by that, I think a lot of times folks think like, oh, I need to have a car, and I need to have my finances together, and I need to, do this. And we have this very like materialistic, capitalistic like way of thinking of it. But the things that I really needed to get in check was, my need and desire to feel like I had to control somebody, right? Like I needed to be in control of what was taking place, opposed to feeling like we were actually coming together and partnering with one another, to help each other achieve, what God put us here for. And so when I got to that space of really, I want to say retracting myself from the situation and thinking about what would be beneficial to me, and thinking more so about how I could serve her, I really started to realize like, yeah, okay, I can do this. This can happen. But there were some things that I had to address, right? Understanding and knowing that growing up, I didn't necessarily have an example of what it meant to be in a committed relationship. My parents weren't married, and growing up, they weren't married and in very strong committed relationships. They were actually in like, serial monogamous relationships. And I thought that was kind of the way to operate. If one thing isn't working out in a relationship, you move to another one. And then I realized as time went on, that I was valuable, and that I had a huge amount of worth and a lot to give to the world and to somebody else. And once I recognized that, I really started to look at myself and think about the things that I needed to be able to work on and develop, so that way I can give my best self to someone else. And then two, lastly, moving away from this narrative of looking at my wife as uh, a possession, right? As if she belongs to me. And, some of my friends are like, what are you talking about? You all are one. That's your wife. And the reality of it is I'm experiencing my wife. She doesn't belong to me. I was gifted an opportunity to be a part of her life. And once I understand and operate in a space of knowing that at any point in time, I could be taken away from her, she could be taken away from me. It allows me to know and understand that at these points in times that we are together, it's important for us to respect each other and to serve each other, so that we can both be well together and move forward and build. So.
If you don't mind sharing a little bit of a roadmap for people listening who might see themselves in some of the ahas you had.
Yeah.
Control, it's a big one for a lot of people, especially myself, and I think a lot of people who've experienced trauma.
Yeah.
Control is a coping mechanism.
Sure.
Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, much like you were saying, right? Control is a coping mechanism, and I think a lot of times we use it to protect ourselves from, being hurt by folks. But what I've learned is that control and vulnerability oftentimes cannot work in the same space, right? And if you're going to truly allow somebody to see who you are and to trust them with all of who you are, and know that if they do challenge you, it's only to make you better, you have to allow yourself to relinquish control. And then also you have to understand, truthfully and honestly, you don't have control over anything. What you have is perspective. And so if you allow yourself to understand and know, I don't have control over any situation, I just have the ability to adjust to whatever the situation may be or what may become of it. And I think when you realize that, and you understand that, it allows you to move and operate in a different capacity. So, for example, this has probably been one of the biggest things, or was one of the biggest things for us when we first decided to get together. My wife, she grew up in a family. Her family was pretty well off financially, and I grew up in a complete opposite situation. And we were trying to make the decision of, are we gonna do our finances, or are we gonna do our separate and then have a joint account? And what we realized was, for her, it was never my money, it was always our money or the money in her family. And for me, it was the opposite. It was, well, this is what I work for and what I have to contribute, and this is what I'll do in order to make sure that we, are taken care of. And so what I learned from that situation is, the same thing is kind of true in terms of control and things that you need from the other person. Sometimes you might not necessarily get everything that you need from your partner, and that doesn't mean that that person is making you unhappy or they're not satisfying you within the relationship. Sometimes that means that you need to figure out who are the folks in your life that can be that additional piece to help you be whole, right? So a lot of my friends have certain qualities and characteristics that my wife doesn't necessarily have. And that doesn't make her a bad person, but that allows me to know and understand that if I need this particular thing, I should probably seek it out in my friends, opposed to impressing upon my wife that she needs to be a certain way. And that for me was a huge thing in terms of understanding control, because I'm asking her to be something that I need her to be, and it's impeding on the fact that she is who she is. And so once I moved away from that space of trying to mold her into something, opposed to just allowing, and I hate to use the language allowing, because I don't allow her to do anything, but opposed to just accepting and understanding that she is who she is. I kind of put myself in this space of, trying to tweak things. So I had to get out of my way. I had to step to the side and realize and know that she's a blessing and a gift to me. And if I, want to continue to experience her as a blessing and a gift, I need to be understanding and committed to the idea of adjusting and building with her, opposed to asking her to build in the way that I want her to build. Yeah.
I appreciate that reflection, and I hope people are taking notes.
Yeah.
Because that was huge. I appreciate that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So right now we're in Black History Month. You had alluded to Black History Month earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
In our household, what I'm hearing is in your household as well, we celebrate Black History Year.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
We just going extra hard this month.
Yeah.
So,
right.
So I like to ask guests during this month, who is someone that's contemporary or from history that doesn't make the top 5 Black history people that are shouted out? Who are, you mentioned the Moors earlier, but who are, contemporary from history? Who are some people you want to put on people's radar?
Yeah, sure. Wow, that's a good question. The Moors are definitely one that I would say. But in addition to the Moors, somebody like John Heinrich Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, right? Who who wrote a book. Excuse me, I'm butchering the title, but They Came Before Columbus is the title of the book, if I'm not mistaken. And who else? Ta-Nehisi Coates. Not a lot of folks know who Ta-Nehisi Coates is, but he's a really prolific writer in this day and time that we're getting the chance to experience. And it might be a stretch to some people, but I liken him to a James Baldwin of today, and to really be able to experience the work that he's done and he continues to do is amazing. But I think even more so than that, Zora Neale Hurston is huge, super huge influence. Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks, I tell folks all the time, Bell Hooks is my second mom. Bell Hooks has really challenged me to really think about what masculinity means for me as a Black man. She has a book titled We Real Cool, which was inspired by Gwendolyn Brooks, her poem. And so in addition to that, thinking about folks like my mom, right? Oftentimes we think about Black history, it's always like someone super, known. But even just my mom, her story and what she's contributed to my life and the community. One of the things that what I've been saying and I've been kind of vocalizing in my life a lot is I think I'm probably going to move to the stage name Service, right? I'm going to start referring to myself as Service because at the heart and at the core of who I am, that's what really has been in my life. So my mom and my dad both worked in the capacity of service work. My dad worked for a company called Loaves and Fishes, where they fed those in need. And my mom has been a caregiver for a very long period of time. And so when I think about Black history and a continued legacy, those are the folks who come to mind. Yeah. I can go all day, but those are the ones that come to mind. Mansa Musa, Abubakari the third, Mansa Abubakari the third. A lot of folks don't know who he is, but he was very pivotal. Actually led a voyage and brought some 60,000 men and women on a voyage from Mali to the Americas, or what we now know as the Americas, some 2,000 years before Columbus even set sail. So finding out about folks like that is huge and essential to understanding the impact of Black history and what folks have contributed.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I to add on to one thing you were saying, Ivan Van Sertima's Golden Age of the Moors is a good one, referencing the Moors. That's a real good one.
Yeah. It was, when I found out about the Moors, that was like huge, and just understanding, their contributions to science and what we understand is now as fashion, and creating the different types of architecture and things that they were invested in and put time and energy into, and how much mathematics is behind all of that, right? Years ago, I used to do this thing called Love Math, particularly because people didn't really love math. And even my students, they were kind of like, Mr. Mays, I'm not really a fan of math. But once you start to understand and know like the history of like, Black and African people who have contributed to mathematics and created a lot of, the foundational mathematics that we know, again, you start to see yourself and believe that you're capable. And so, yeah.
I think that was a good clarifying thing because, with kind of the Arab colonization of Northern Africa, when people think Moors, they think Arab. But you're talking about Black Moors.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And yeah, with that history, oftentimes folks, attempt to put an erasure on it, right, and act as if it doesn't exist, and even in present times, and like you said, identify the Moors oftentimes as Arab, and we connect that to Middle Eastern or uh, Asiatic of some sort, and oftentimes not understand and recognize that these men also identified as Africans, and a lot of times migrated from Morocco, and went from Morocco into Europe, and so even with that, folks oftentimes forget that Morocco is in Africa, and so. Yeah, we could talk about this all night, man. We could talk about this.
I got super deep into the Moors my senior year of college.
Okay.
In the personal development space or business development, so that's a lot of people listening right now, they'll have heard some guru of personal development sometimes say, you got to burn your boats. They'll hear somebody say that. That's a Moorish general that did that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff, man. Powerful.
So let's just as we start to conclude, though, you're so intentional about your office. Anything else you want to highlight? So you got 2 books on the back wall. Anything you wanna reference
in the office?
Yeah, that we can see.
Man.
Somebody good conversation starters.
Bring something to light. I got an opportunity to hear Dr. Joy DeGruy speak. And she talked a lot about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I had a copy of her book before and got a chance to read it, but I got an additional copy. And it was so powerful just to hear her talk about the different experiences, in particular talking about traumas, right? And how traumas are handed down from generation to generation in the same way that recipes are handed down from generation to generation. And sometimes we may not necessarily think that we've, come in contact with or adopted some of these traumas from our parents or our grandparents, but just from being in close proximity and in relationship with them, a lot of times those traumas have been transferred from generation to generation. And I thought that was so powerful because sometimes when, folks have traumas and you've lived with them for so long, you can you can put yourself or have yourself in a space where you don't even recognize that what you're experiencing in your way of life is problematic for you and for those around you. And so that book is really, really cool. Let me grab it really quick just so folks can see it. I have a whole bookcase over here on the side. And I grabbed two of the books that have been like super important for me in my development. So this is Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. And then the other book that I grabbed was Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, who's a Brazilian sociologist. And in his work, he talks a lot about education, and in particular, the different ways that people learn. And so he's talking about problem-posing method versus banking method, and how education, in a lot of senses of how we've learned it in America and just in the world in general, oftentimes is a teacher who's like spouting out information and you just deposit it in, which is where banking method comes. And he's asking that people try to move into a space of problem-posing method where students are teaching the teacher, and teacher is also learning from students. And it's more of a two-way learning experience opposed to a very hierarchical, transfer of knowledge. So two very good books that I enjoyed.
I love that. If you don't mind me plugging, for folks who are regular listeners or want to take a deep dive, Dr. Lidiana Garcia, I did an interview with her a couple of weeks ago. She's a psychologist. We did a great talk on intergenerational trauma in the context of global white supremacy. So want to suggest people check that out. And then with Lloyd Wilkie, we talked a lot about student-centered learning and
Okay.
different, facilitation. So if y'all want to check that out, Lloyd Wilkie. So just
Okay.
wanted to plug those for folks who want to,
And if we're talking about books, I have a book, like you said, called And Still I Rise to Fantasize, that I wrote at the beginning of 2019. And that book really kind of tracks my journey from literally the chapters go from the first chapter is trauma. And then the last chapter of the book is transformational self-love. And so it's a poetry and affirmation book. But if you're an educator or you're just somebody who, wants to, have something to kind of dissect and go through as you're, thinking about your process or helping someone else through their process of healing. Not just because I wrote it, but I highly encourage you to look into it. Because there are some things, like I said earlier, sometimes poetry and art can create a space for folks to want to talk about, the traumas and the experiences that they've gone through in a way that regular conversation may not be able to create that space. And so, so feel free to check that out as well.
Well, I know folks would be sending me hate mail, finding out my address and pushing me over if I didn't say, do you want to share a poem with us?
Oh, wow.
No pressure.
Yeah. No, yeah, I can. I try not to, like, I don't know if I could stand up and perform it, but I'll share a piece for sure. You want one from out of the book, or do you want one from, just one of my performance pieces?
I personally like the memorized ones, but it's your space. You do your thing.
Okay. I'll do a memorized one.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna do it from my seat, if that's okay.
I think that's best.
Just be in the camera, and I may get a little loud, so I don't know if
I have a editing system that'll equalize all of the volumes at the end.
Perfect.
So do your thing.
Perfect. Okay, so this poem is one that I mentioned earlier in the interview, called "The Zoo." Here it goes. Zoos of all the best animals. It's the one place you can go to see all the different species that you will otherwise only see on TV. They've got lions, chimpanzees, birds with colorful beaks, and butterflies that makes me think that God tapped into his inner child when he created them. The last time I went, I saw an elephant lift a tree trunk with his snout, saw a koala bear eat a snail, make a funny face, then spit it back out. I was having a good time. Until the little boy next to me asked the question that will unearth the oldest tree. He asked, why does everything from Africa always end up in cages? My world is now silent. Can't help but feel how humble the wind blows on the back of my neck. When you are staring at your reflection in the plexiglass home of 100 wild things, common and familiar are the last words you expect to mumble. But I've learned that in this world, people will tap the glass of the box that they put you in, taunt you and snap their best photos when you look your most aggressive. Freedom is as fake as the habitat we call city. Even being black and non-threatening is a cage of its own. You have to act a certain way, think a certain way, look a certain way, express yourself a certain way, I swear. These days, I find myself on the perimeter of local neighborhood ciphers, trying to quit hip-hop like cigarettes, wishing I could rock on in yes, yes, y'all, but spitting 16 bars, spitting 16 bars, spitting 16 bars, spitting 16 bars, spitting 16 bars sounds counterproductive to my quest for freedom. Sounds like oxymoron, sucking the oxygen out of a gas chamber. Sounds like metaphors behind metal doors. Sounds like similes that make words, zoos, and prisons seem similar. Sounds like I realize I only wear the gifts that look good on me. Sounds like I ain't as free as the animals I've paid to see. And as I stand here on this stage, using an art form that will be associated with my intellect, attempting to look more parrot than pigeon, tell me, do I look more exotic than the other brown boys? Tell me, do I put on a good show? Tell me why it is that we believe that prisons have all the worst people, that it is the one place you can go to see all the different species that you will otherwise only see on TV. They've got murderers, drug dealers, thieves, and innocent men draped in brown layers of guilty, and it makes the rest of the world think that God had nothing to do with our creation. Tell me that this is not true. Tell me that this poem made you think about what it really means to be free. Tell me that I'll make it, since you cannot tell me why everything from Africa always ends up in cages.
Yes.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
That poem brings back memories.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, man.
How long ago was that? How long? That was about 7 years ago.
No, not that long.
Oh, yeah, it was like
2014. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, hey man, I want to thank you so much.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad we've stayed in touch and we made this happen.
Yeah, sure enough. I appreciate you.
So where can folks reach out to you and tell you how awesome you are, connect with you, community build, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to connect with me via social media, you can find me on Facebook under Timothy Mays, TimothyMays. If you want to find me on Instagram, you'll find me under the same at Timothy Mays. And if you want to email me, you can email me at timothy@timothymays.net. So you can also find my book there as well. timothymays.net is my website, my official website, where you can, reach out to me, connect with me, have a host of workshops and things that I lead as well, that are focused around healing and, connection and all that other kind of stuff as well. So please do reach out. I love building community, love connecting with folks, even if it's just to have a conversation. And if there's a way that I could be a support to you and the work that you're doing, please let me know how we can build.
Okay, folks, show notes for today, tomrell.com/Timothy, tomrell.com/TIMOTHY, tomrell.com/Timothy. I'll make sure we got the IG, the website, and the email all down there if you were on the go. Timothy, I got two last questions for you.
Sure.
This is my year of adventure.
Okay.
What does adventure mean to you? What adventure is calling you? Was an adventure you're on or ready to go on? Any reflections you have around adventure?
Yeah, sure. I think adventure is about, trying new things and going into new spaces, right? And allowing yourself to be fully immersed in the process. Sometimes we can be apprehensive about things that, on the surface may seem fearful, but once we get into the feeling in the moment, we realize and understand that, the thing that we thought we would be fearful of was actually the thing that we needed, right? And it expanded our horizon and our thought process about what we were actually capable of. And so for me, when I think about my adventure and, adventures that I'm being led upon and down at this point in time, I think I'm being led through an adventure of truly building authentic community with folks, and an adventure of allowing myself to create spaces and be a part of spaces where some real, true, authentic community is being shared. Because I think sometimes when we see what's going on in the very, small scope of what news and media shows us about what's going on in the world, sometimes folks can feel that there's reason to be apprehensive about connecting with other folks. And so I think for me, I'm traveling through this journey of still constantly believing in humanity and constantly believing in the goodness of people at the core of who they are. So, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Timothy, I want to thank you so much for taking, time out of your really packed schedule and sharing your gifts,
your
thoughts with us. I'm glad we're a friendship. We're still keeping it on, 6-7 years later. So it means a lot to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. And like I said before, I thank you for, sharing your platform with me and taking this time out of your day as well, to really have some true conversation with me. And I can't say enough, I really appreciate it, because I hope from this, somebody will hear my story and connect with, and some part of it will resonate with them, to the point where they feel encouraged to continue on. So proud of you. Keep doing what you're doing. And yeah, man, I see big things. So I'm excited for you.
I appreciate that. God
Yeah.
willing, inshallah.
Yeah.
Okay, our closing ritual
Mhm.
is for you to share an invitation with those who are listening. So an invitation for them to consider, to evolve into, to look to. What is your invitation?
Yeah. Yeah, I invite you to join me on the adventure, right? of continually believing and hoping, in the good of folks, and understanding that, at the essence of who people are, what they really want is community and love, and to be able to build with folks. So I invite you to come with me on the journey of continually building with folks, and challenging yourself to get out of the way of yourself, so that way that you can truly experience love, care, and appreciation the way that you deserve.
Well said. Well said. Thank you once again, Timothy. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And to all of those who are listening, as always, we're wishing you peace and blessings. Thank you. One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching.